Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about our Australian experience implementing a principles-based code of conduct. From the outset, I'd like to note that I'm here today in my capacity as the chair of the Professionalism Committee, which is what our Code of Conduct Guidance Group evolved into. And as a result, this presentation is the outcome of the work of that entire committee and not myself, and so I'm very thankful to that committee for the work that they've done. So my purpose here today is to talk about the outcomes of our implementation of the new code in 2020, and to ask the question, has the new code been a help or a hindrance for our profession? We hope that this will be of benefit to other associations that might be considering a move, like we made, from a rules-based code of conduct to a principles-based code of conduct. So to begin, I'll talk a little bit about, give a brief discussion of the change that we went through in recent years and how it came about. The introduction of the new Code of Conduct was a 4-year process beginning in 2016 with a request by Council for a comprehensive review of both the Code of Conduct and the disciplinary scheme, separate processes but happening in parallel. And by 2017 it was identified that potentially we might want to move to a principles-based code of conduct, and the consultation process with members began about what the wording would be and what that would look like in practice. Following a number of years of consultation, drawing on the experience of other international bodies like the IFOA, it ultimately resulted in the transition in 2020 to that principles-based code. Now, for some it might be obvious what I'm talking about when I say rules-based and principles-based code, but for those where it's not quite as clear, what am I talking about? Well, a rules-based code of conduct is one that sets out, as it sounds, a set of rules that defines what must or must not be done by an actuary in conducting their professional work. In contrast, a principles-based code outlines expectations and qualities that are expected of actuarial work when we deliver it. So it's higher level and more general in nature. Now, both of these approaches can have their problems. A rules-based approach can't hope to cover every single circumstance that is relevant to an actuary in their day-to-day work or every industry. And of course, as soon as you set out a bunch of rules, you run the risk of loopholes emerging or creative interpretation of the rules so that people appear to be complying with the code, but in fact are not living up to the intent. A principles-based code has problems as well. It's shorter and simpler, and in turn it might be considered vague and subjective. But it does have other benefits as well. It can cover a broader range of industries and types of work more easily. It can be more meaningful to people outside of our own profession, so it's less technical in nature and more understandable to a layperson or to our customers. And it can be shorter, as evidenced by our new code, which is 3 pages long compared to the previous code, which was 10 pages long. And so we headed down that path and adopted a new code in 2020 with 6 key principles: integrity, compliance, competence and care, objectivity, speaking up, and communication. And importantly, this was a code that covered all members and all work conducted by those members, not just formal actuarial reports or qualified actuaries. And at the time, the Code of Conduct Guidance Committee was formed to develop extra material to support that simple set of principles. And that code subsequently evolved into the Professionalism Committee, which also now has obligations around the ongoing member education and engagement around matters of professionalism and ethics. There were concerns, however, such as the lack of detail would be problematic and that it might result in challenges in pursuing disciplinary action against members. There were concerns that the general nature of the principles might mean that members' activities outside of their professional work would be captured under the code, and that might limit personal freedoms. And speaking up, which was a late addition to the set of principles that we adopted. There was the last one that was added to the consultation process. There was concern that that would be an additional burden to members, and we'll talk more about that later. So the key question today is, 3 years on, how are we feeling about it? Have we reaped the benefits that we expected of a new code of conduct? Were any of the concerns justified? Well, given all the discussion over the last few days about data analytics and AI, I'd love to tell you that we found a fantastic data lake that we could perform a bunch of analysis on to work out whether our members were better behaved today than they were 5 years ago. But we don't have anything like that, so we went back to basics and we interviewed a number of people around the Code of Conduct. We spoke to people involved in the original design of the Code of Conduct. We spoke to the CEO of the Actuaries Institute, a representative from the disciplinary scheme, a representative of the IFOA, and also a number of younger members of the profession to ascertain what their view was of the Code of Conduct and how they felt about their obligations under that. And with that, we've come up with a number of observations about what we think are the key benefits that we've gotten out of the transition to the new code. Our first observation is simply one of the importance of the new principle of speaking up. You heard yesterday in the morning's plenary from Commissioner Hayne, who conducted the Financial Services Royal Commission in Australia. That was conducted from 2017 to 2019, so the same period in which we were reviewing our Code of Conduct. As you heard, it highlighted a range of misconduct across industries like banking, insurance, superannuation, all industries with high actuarial representation. And so this was very significant to our profession because many of us had been sitting in those businesses which were found to have behaved badly. The message was clear that change was required. Commissioner Hayne made this observation you can see on the screen, noting that an organisation's culture needs to ask, what should I do, rather than what can I do, and on the importance of the need to be able to speak up when something isn't right. You'll note that what can I do is a phrase that resonates with a rules-based code of conduct. What am I allowed to do? What is permitted? In contrast, what should I do is a question that aligns to a principles-based approach. It says, what qualities do I want to exhibit when I make a decision and when I deliver work? So there is a great alignment between the outcomes of the Royal Commission and the changes that we were making. And in particular, the inclusion of speaking up meant that that expectation is now embedded in, for actuaries. We can't simply deliver our work and assume that it's someone else's decision about how that's used, because our code has an obligation that if our client is seen to be using what we've done in a way that is not compliant or is not honest, then we have an obligation to speak up. So this aspect of the code was very important in embedding that. And when we spoke to younger members of the profession, they called that out as a really important tool for them if they were in an organisation where they felt concern or worried about something that was going on. Their professional obligation in the Code of Conduct is a tool that allows them to speak up if needed. So that connects with the second observation that we had about the benefits of moving to a new code, which is the added value to the brand of actuaries. When a member of the public uses the service of an actuary, they have an expectation of the quality of the work that will be delivered. A principles-based code is a fantastic way to set out those qualities clearly, defining for the profession what it means to deliver work as an actuary. Our 6 principles do that in a way that is meaningful not just to us as members, but to the broader public and to our customers, because they all understand the concepts of integrity and objectivity, and it reflects the nature of the advice that is expected of an actuary. It's also applicable in any area of practice, which was part of the intention of the change, was to make sure that we were future-proofing our profession to work in new fields and areas, and it doesn't rely on traditional actuarial functions or responsibilities. Importantly, with actuaries holding a range of statutory roles in Australia, it supports our social licence to be involved in those roles, particularly because we're self-regulated. And it also supports the Actuaries Institute's goal of being involved in public policy. A great example of how the Code of Conduct has been used is in a campaign that was run by the Actuaries Institute called Do Data Better. And this was a campaign aimed at highlighting the value of having actuaries involved in data analytics or data science work. We heard in some of the presentations on Monday about the importance of the hybrid role of someone who spanned those fields. And this was highlighting the benefits of inclusion of actuaries. And in doing that, they specifically highlighted the actuarial ethos, which was a reusing of the Code of Conduct to describe the additional qualities that an actuary brings with their work that you might not get from other sources. So this campaign specifically enhances the public's understanding of the profession and the ethical qualities of actuaries in a way that a rules-based Code of Conduct would be unlikely to support. I mentioned that the Professionalism Committee has obligations around the ongoing education of members, and this is another area where we think that there has been a big win from the Code of Conduct. Traditionally and historically, our education process used to focus on professionalism and ethics mainly at one point during your qualification process, at the point where you formally qualified as an actuary, and we'd sit you down and talk about the code and obligations and ethical thinking, and then we'd set you off into the world in the hope that you were set up well for the future. But what the Royal Commission showed us was that we need to be thinking about professional conduct and ethics regularly throughout our career. It needs to be an ongoing focus. And so as part of bringing in the new code, we also brought in an obligation that out of our annual continuing professional development obligations of 100 points in the Australian Institute that we have to earn, each year 5 of those points must relate to professionalism training. And by that I mean training that relates to one of the areas of the Code of Conduct. It might be conflicts of interest or quality of work, or in ethical training, so considering ethical dilemmas or considering how to make better ethical decisions. For those of you who are members of the Australian Institute, this particular session right now is counting towards your 5 points, so make sure you make a note. And there is a strong linkage between the code and ethics. Our Code of Conduct is like an expression of the virtues that we expect of actuaries. And so in ethical theory, virtue ethics is an important way of making good ethical decisions. So we can link those two and form a better discussion about ethics with our professionals. And importantly, at the end of the day, it's much more interesting to talk about challenging ethical problems or dilemmas and how that relates to our Code of Conduct than it is to remind people of the checklist of things that they have to complete when they deliver an actuarial report. So big improvements there. So what about the other end of the spectrum? Were there problems? Was it too vague to understand? Well, when you take our 3-page code and you chop off the introduction and you chop off the definitions, you've really only got 2 pages, which is really not very much. And when we talk to younger members of the profession, they also observed that it seemed short, it seemed simple, it seemed obvious. But one of those people also observed that they thought it was really important that the shorter principles cover more by saying less, which is really at the heart of the power of a principles-based Code of Conduct and of those more expansive principles. But of course, the key is what else we do to support members in understanding those expectations. And so supporting the code is 50 pages of guidance produced by the Code of Conduct Guidance Group with significant help from the IFOA and their documents, which we drew on significantly. So additional detail is there, not to be read and understood definitively as a member, but as a reference point when you have interesting questions or challenges about conduct issues. So a related concern to the issue of the code being high level was a concern about whether the change would have any impact on the disciplinary process. We spoke to a representative of the disciplinary scheme, and this is an area where, in all honesty, not enough time has passed to really make an assessment of the impact. Importantly though, we've seen no noticeable change in the frequency or nature of the issues arising, and we didn't hear any concerns about any inability to pursue conduct issues where the Institute or the disciplinary process sought to. So we need to wait and see on that one. So in summary, we see that in Australia, what we've seen is good value from the move to a principles-based code of conduct. In particular, for the strong messaging around speaking up, for the benefits to our actuarial brand, and for the win in our ongoing professionalism education for the membership. And in transitioning, we haven't yet noticed any notable issues of the kinds that were raised as concerns when we introduced the code. So in thinking about how this is relevant for other associations that might be interested in such a change, importantly, we don't intend to suggest that this is the right fit for all organisations at all times. Context is critical. And while the timing was right for Australia, particularly in the light of industry events relating to ethical conduct of professionals in financial services, the experience may vary based on how well established your profession is and whether good practices are already in place. So careful consideration is needed as to whether it's the right time for other bodies. But if you do opt to move towards a principles-based code, our observations would be, importantly, don't underestimate the size of the task. It was a 4-year process for us, and the consultation with the membership was absolutely critical to make sure that the perceived issues were considered and the appropriate wording built into our drafting. And in doing so, it's really important to remember that you can cover more by saying less. People like clarity and detail. And so as you go through the process, you will find that some people want extra detail. They want more words. They want clarity to give them confidence that they're complying. But this may lose one of the key benefits of a principles-based code. So fight for simplicity in order to avoid slipping back into details and rules. And lastly, trust is key. The broader nature of a principles-based code means that the membership must be also able to trust that it will be applied appropriately, and also requires the trust of the public and stakeholders who rely on the quality of our work. In the end, for me personally, it's the clear definition of the qualities that define our profession and the opportunity to communicate those to others that is the key of the Code of Conduct. Importantly, it helps provide an active reference point for us as individuals to help make better ethical decisions when we undertake our work. And that's the key opportunity that, if it's the right time for your association, is, I think, a great benefit of the move to a principles-based Code of Conduct. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stuart. So, if I check the questions, it seems that there is no question. Oh, yes, sorry, there. Okay, so question, okay. It's not easy. So the first question would be, do you find the what should I do may not be strong enough compared to what am I responsible / required to do? Do you find the what should I do may not be strong enough compared to what I am responsible / required to do?
So a comparison of what should I do versus what am I required to do. Yeah, I mean, what am I required to do is, one of the key questions of moving to a principles-based code is, and one of the challenges that was raised was you do lose some of those requirements. And I think that's where that consideration of where the profession is at a particular point in time is really important, because there may be points where there is a need to state what is required to be done. But as the profession evolves, as the community evolves, I think sometimes there is a right time to make that transition so that it forces a broader consideration. Because if the only thing you're thinking about is what must I do, there's a whole bunch of things that you might be missing. An over-focus on compliance, an over-focus on specifically ticking the boxes of a list of requirements might mean that you're not really thinking about the ethical issue that is sitting to the side. And I think that's the benefit of a principles-based code, is that it imposes more of a responsibility on the individual to think about what their obligations are, rather than follow a set of instructions.
Thank you. There are other questions. It seems very interesting. Can you comment on the price optimization issues raised in the UK and how that aligns with serving the public?
What was the issue?
It's the price optimization issue. So from my understanding, it's on motor pricing, the renewal premium going too high compared to new business.
Oh.
So it's the multiplier, yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm across that particular issue, so yes, I'm not sure I've got anything that I'll be able to add on that.
Yes, the loyalty penalty, meaning that if you renew your premium because you are loyal, then your premium goes up compared to someone who is brand new to the brand new client.
Absolutely,
Yep.
The loyalty premium issue.
Yep.
Well, to be clear, I'm not here to offer a judgment or answer on any particular ethical issue. Our role is to help people have tools to think through the issues rather than to give people answers. But it is an issue that we have talked about as a committee as being something that we'd like to introduce into the type of ethical dilemmas that we want people to think about. Because that's a great example where there are a bunch of different perspectives and a bunch of different issues that need to be thought about, and we can use a principles-based code of conduct to see whether we're delivering on delivering to the right stakeholders the right outcomes and making the right decisions by having those broad perspectives. Having those broad perspectives when we consider what we're doing, rather than just functionally turning the handle on a pricing exercise and stating some outcomes. It means we need to think about the broader outcomes of our actions.
Thanks. So the next question is, how much work is required for how many years afterwards to make the changes stick?
Great question. How do you make the changes? How do you make the changes stick? Regular discussion about the obligations, I think, is key. One of my favourite stories about psychology studies is a story about a psychology study where they took university students and they got them to do an exam where they were self-marking, I think, and they were able to tell after the exam whether people had cheated or not. So they took a sample of university students and they put them through the process and asked them to complete the exam. They were able to measure what proportion of people cheated. Then they ran another sample through, and before they completed the test, they asked the students to sign at the top of their form that they understood that they were completing this test under the university's code of conduct obligations, and that they wouldn't cheat. And remarkably, the outcomes were that less people cheated. Now, the kicker to that story is that there was no code of conduct at that university. So simply prompting people to remind them that there is a set of obligations under their profession or under a code of conduct, keeping that top of mind results in better behaviour. So I think making it stick is not a job that is going to end It is our role to regularly and continually talk about these matters so that we are constantly bringing it to the top of people's mind, and that it's always at the forefront of our thinking.
Thank you. So it seems like a lot of questions. So we still have some time anyway, but interesting questions. Have you had any feedback from those members who had concerns prior to the change? And if so, do you think their concerns have been allayed?
So we did seek out. So as part of what we did, we looked at the transcripts and listened to the recordings of the feedback sessions. And we were able to identify some of the people that had concerns, and we did go back to them, to a couple of them, to see if those concerns were still valid. While people perhaps still held some of those misgivings, I remember one of them was related to the earlier question about the lack of rules and requirements in the new standard, in the new code. But no one was able to articulate a specific concern where they felt like things were falling down as a result of the new code. So we did check on that, but we haven't seen anything that I guess makes us think that it was the wrong decision or that we missed anything in the move to the new code.
Thank you. I will take two more questions. One I will read, and the other one, please vote for the best, because there are so many questions, so I will just take the best. So the one I will read is the following. The strongest message I heard at ICA 2023, mind others litter. So so ask, what should I do?
Sorry, I missed the first part.
The strongest message I heard at ICA 2023 is mind others litter. So ask, what should I do? I think this was referring to a presentation where, you know, there were like 3 different approaches for the littering. Either I don't pick it, either I pick only my own, or I pick other ones' litter. That was one of the presentations. So in terms of the code of conduct, how would this translate?
I think the benefit of the code of conduct, I mentioned virtue ethics before. Virtue ethics is a mode of ethical thinking where you examine what quality you want to demonstrate in making a decision. How do you want to be seen after you've made an ethical decision? Do you want to be seen as someone who is honest or someone who has integrity? I think the benefit of the code is that it forces that mode of thinking. So in any question about what should I do, the answer has to start coming back to what should I do. In asking what should I do is coming back to how do I demonstrate the qualities under the code that I'm hoping to deliver.
Okay, the last one. So I asked for a vote, but I can vote from this iPad, but somehow I cannot see the votes results, so sorry about that, if you voted.
You can save them for later.
I will pick one which I personally like, so that's the privilege of the moderator. Please talk about the interaction between the code and practice standards.
Yes, so obviously there are also, as part of the Actuaries Institute, a range of professional standards that govern more specific activities around our conduct, whether that's in specific industries or specific types of reports. And those, if you like, I guess, do get down into often into more of a rules-based approach because they are more specific to particular industries. So I think what we end up with is a set of specific rules around professional standards or guidance notes with an overlay of the code of conduct, which is much more general and designed to capture anything that might not be covered. So they don't interact specifically, but the code of conduct is an overlay that can be applied to any of the work that is conducted under any of the specific professional standards.
Thanks a lot, Stuart. I think that's enough for now, but there are other questions, so if you have other questions to Stuart, maybe you can ask him during the tea break later. So please join me too.